Everybody, welcome to this afternoon's IIRSM Yorkshire and Humber branch webinar. I'm pleased to invite or introduce you to Richard Wade, who's the Director of Risk and Safety Compliance Services Limited. He's joining us today to talk about health and safety in the agricultural sector, so it should be very, very interesting. If at any point throughout the webinar you've got any questions, please put them in the questions box that appears on your screen, and we'll get to them either throughout or at the end. Okay, that's it for me. Over to you, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everyone, and good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And before we get started, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for inviting me along today. It's a real pleasure and an honour actually to talk to the International Institute Risk Safety Management branch here. And I'm hoping I can do it justice with my little presentation on agricultural health and safety, a topic that is very, very close to my heart and where I spend actually most of my working life out on farms and estates throughout the UK, looking after and advising and teaching farmers and estate owners on what is a very, very complex and a wide area of health and safety. And I'll brush across the key issues later to give you a flavour, if you like, of the world of safety in agriculture, but we'll come on to that in a short while. So thank you very much for inviting me along. I did want to start by just outlining who I am, where I've come from, what my career so far in health and safety and risk management has been all about, and how I've ended up becoming this health and safety advisor in landed estates. That's not the only thing that I do, but that does take up a prominent and most of my life is spent on farms and estates throughout the UK. So by way of introduction, really, and a little bit of background into myself, my name is Richard Wade. I'm the director and co-founder of Risk and Safety Compliance Services, and we are based here in Newcastle upon Tyne, literally on the coast. So if you look out this window here on my right hand side, if you were to carry on walking for 2.5 minutes, your feet would be wet because you'd be in the North Sea, and your feet would be very cold as well because the North Sea is freezing. So that's where we're based, and my career in safety started way back when in the British Army. So I spent 15 years in total in the Royal Army Medical Corps, and that's really relevant to where I am today because although I started off as a medic, so I was a combat medic, a patcher upper and fixer of injured people throughout my 15 years, I had the opportunity to specialise, and I chose my specialism in Army environmental health. So I spent the best part of almost 13.5 years of the 15 that I served in the British Army in Army environmental health. Now, although we didn't know it at the time, so that's going back into the early 80s to mid 90s, and although we didn't know it back in those early days, that was kind of the start of health and safety applicable to the armed forces. So in the early 80s, the armed forces were exempt from all health and safety legislation, and indeed food safety legislation. So the HSC and the local authorities were allowed nowhere near the Army, Navy and Air Force. But back in the late 80s, in 1988 in fact, that situation changed dramatically, with Crown immunity was abolished. And so all of a sudden, at the back end of the 80s, health and safety legislation, food safety legislation, environmental legislation all suddenly became enforceable against the Crown. We as Army environmental health technicians were the ideal go-to people to sort of pick up the health and safety mantra, because in a way it's what we had already been doing for many years. We just didn't call it health and safety. So for years we'd been going around from our headquarters around the world into various Army units, doing health and safety inspections, checking water, checking hygiene, checking sanitation, checking training status. Just wasn't called safety. So that was the start of my introduction to health and safety way back when. Briefly, in 1997, I decided it was time to leave the armed forces, and I left voluntary. I actually paid to leave. It cost me 200 quid. I left the British Forces, and then I joined Heath Lambert Insurance, which was a specialist insurance broker based out of London, but we had a risk management arm, and I became a health and safety consultant within that organisation. And at that time, there was a very good friend of mine, Tony Brunskill. He lives down the road from me now, just down in Washington here in the Northeast. Tony and I were two of the key consultants there, and in 2000 we decided that we could do this by ourselves, and so we left what was a great brokerage, still is, and we set up a company called Corporate Safety Solutions Limited. We ran that together for best part of 8 years, and then I left and I set up a separate company called Risk and Safety Compliance Services back then, not the current version, by the way. And a couple of years later, we actually sold that business. That enabled me then to travel abroad, and we went to New Zealand. So as a family, my good wife and my then one son, I landed a job in local government in New Zealand on the South Island in Ashburton, where I became the regulatory compliance manager with a team of 12 international people. We had South Africans, we had Fijians, British people, we had an Australian guy and a few Kiwis, and we ran the council's sort of health and safety, water safety and compliance offering, and that was a great experience. Moving on from there, we came back to the UK, and my next little venture around the world was to join a company called ThyssenKrupp, the German industrial people, on a project in Liberia, in a little place in the northeast of Liberia called Yikepi, where they were building a mine, effectively an overground mine, and that was pulled short by the Ebola outbreak, so that put stop to that. So we then found ourselves back in the UK, where I did a 3-year stint at Charnwood Borough Council as an embedded consultant in the landlord services division, where we looked after about 120 staff members. I was the sole safety advisor, looking after about 120 guys and girls who were basically in charge of looking after the property. So all of the social housing, the high rise and the blocks of flats and the council houses, our role was to make sure that they were fit for purpose. All the repairs and maintenance and upkeep was landlord services responsibility, and I ensured that health and safety was right on top of that agenda, because that was a very risky environment to be working in. That project came to an end in the back end of 2017, where I joined a local company here actually in Newcastle called Lysits. Now Lysits is a big insurance broker. They have about 17 offices across the UK. They now employ just under 500 people. And again, this is very relevant to why I now work in agriculture and landed estates, insofar as Lysits is one of the key brokers of insurance to that sector. So Lysits has about 10,000 customers, 10,000 clients across the UK and Southern Ireland, the big in Ireland, and also the vast majority of their database, client base, is agriculture, farms, landed estates, and those agricultural related businesses. And that's really where I became, or had to become, the agricultural safety guy, because my role, I was taken on in 2017 to set up what is now Lysits Risk Management Services. And we had to develop services to offer to the client base. And so it was a natural progression for me to study and work and really get my teeth into farms, estates and agriculture to enable me and my team, which grew to 8 strong by the time I left in 2020, to enable us to offer, pragmatic, solid advice to a sector which you'll hear about later, that really struggles with health and safety and implementing health and safety. So it was critical that we had a great offering that was not only robust to meet legal standards and ensure that our customers and clients were statutory compliant, but also to be put across in a way that they could understand it within the farming and agricultural sector. Safety, and it still is, was a bit of a minefield. and quite difficult to navigate. And our role was to make that easy and make that very, very straightforward, yet still compliant. So that's what we did. And then in 2020, I decided to take a bit of a gamble, but calculated risk really, and I handed in my notice with Lysits. There's still a great working relationship. I still work alongside Lysits to this day. We have customers in common, and we do actually collaborate on a number of projects. But it was time for me to sort of branch off and set up Risk and Safety Compliance Services 2020 as it is now, and offer a similar level of cover and advice and assistance to various clients, including agriculture, which I'll talk about in a moment. So that's me. So that's my journey so far. It's been interesting. It's been fun, and I think importantly, the reason I'm so passionate about health and safety, not just in the agricultural sector, is the diversity. And for those of you working in this industry, in health and safety, regardless of the sector that you're working in, I think it's that diversity that keeps it fresh, that keeps it alive, and then enables, you know, us the safety practitioners to still infuse safety and put it across to people in a manner that engages them and makes them want to take part in the process, be part of the solution, and ultimately keep everybody as safe as possible whilst at work. So that's me so far. So what do I do now then? So on the screen in front of you, you can see a bit of a selection of the people I currently work with. Now, you can see I've still got Lysits here in the middle, front and center, in the middle on the left-hand side, because it was instrumental and a key part of me becoming well versed in farming and landed estates and agricultural health and safety, and I'm forever grateful for that. It was a fantastic company to work for, and is still a fantastic company to be associated with now. If you look on the right-hand side, though, the key ones, the bigger boxes that you see on the bottom right is the Northumberland Estates. So I am currently the health and safety advisor to the Duke of Northumberland and all of his UK operations, and that's quite a complex and large undertaking, and it encompasses farms and estates and industrial units. We've got castles, as you know, Alnwick Castle up in the northeast, just up the coast from here, up the road in Alnwick. And that's a very diverse operation that keeps me extremely busy, but it's an absolute brilliant place to be working and be involved with. And then allied to my farm work, I do various other little bits and bobs. Currently I'm the independent health and safety auditor to IIRSM buses. So depending on where you are in the UK, there's a very good chance that IIRSM buses operate in your patch. Not if you're in Scotland, obviously, but at most places throughout England, you'll find IIRSM buses bumbling around the streets. I, on average, do about 40 to 50 ISO 45001 audits in IIRSM depots every year. That keeps me pretty busy. And then moving across on the right hand side, we've got IIRSM Road Transport Services. I'm not their advisor, we just help them get ISO 45001 accreditation with the other people you see on there, HSE QSmart, very close collaboration that I work together with those guys. They're just down the road here at Newton Aycliffe, and we together work with companies who want to get 45001 accreditation. So we did it for IIRSM Road Transport Services. That's separate to the buses. It's the train side of the business. And on the bottom left, you can see Devro. Now, they're a weird setup, if you like. I mean that in the nicest way. Devro are the biggest sausage skin makers in the world. And we assisted those guys, and they're literally in 15 countries around the globe. And we had, along with HSE QSmart, we worked in close collaboration and developed their safety management system and all of their training materials to enable those guys to go for 45001 accreditation. And then you've got ABRI, and there's various other organisations that we work with. But I think key for today, farming, estates, agriculture has to be Northumberland Estates. So farming then, agriculture, it's a very interesting sector to work in. It's also a very challenging sector to work in, and I'll go into the reasons why it's so challenging a little bit later on. But it's very diverse, and there are a number of factors that make it one of the most dangerous places to work in the UK today. And not just today, for at least the last 10 years, if you look back in statistics, and I'm going to show you a few in a moment, it's always up there. It's always near the top of the list when it comes to fatalities, injuries, ill health. It's there, you know, most years it's outstripping even the construction sector. And the reasons for that are it's such a diverse and dangerous work environment. It's big machinery. You know, when things go wrong in agriculture, it tends not to be paper cuts and nicks and little cuts and a bit of bleeding. You know, these are big, dangerous items of machinery, big, heavy power, heavy torque, where we're working near power lines and all the other things that I'm going to mention very briefly in a moment. But it's a dangerous sector to work in. Let me put that into a little bit of context for you. I'm going to show you a few sets of data going back to the 2019-2020. Now, you working in safety, you'll be as well aware as I am that every year around about March, April time, the Health and Safety Executive will publish their annual statistics of fatalities and injuries, and they'll break it down by sector. And so what I've done is I've just pulled out the agricultural sector for the purposes of today's talk. What you're looking at in front of you there is the 2019-2020 fatality list, in which there were 21. But what I'd like you to sort of make a brief mental note of is the numbers at the bottom, the 7, the 2 4s and the 3 2s. So the makeup of the fatalities. Now, it tends not to change year on year. So here, if you're looking at that one, you can see vehicles, falls, hit by objects, killed by animals, contact with machinery, and being trapped by something collapsing or falling onto people. And 21 people died in that reporting period. If we move on to, I do beg your pardon, let me go back one. If we move on to the next year, the figures went up, almost doubled, as you can see there. But look at the constituent parts, look at the makeup. It's still the same. It's the vehicles, it's the animals, it's things trapping people, things injuring people and hitting people. And there's a couple in there on this particular group here that are actually unusual, killed by fire and asphyxiation and drowning. And I'll talk about why that's so relevant to the sector a little bit later on when we come to talk about slurry and slurry mixing and the obnoxious and dangerous chemicals involved with that. So the year before we had 21 deaths. This particular set of statistics, we've got 41 deaths. And then if we fast forward to the latest statistics that have been produced by the Health and Safety Executive, we've almost halved from the previous set, but it's still obviously too many. It's still 25 fatalities in the sector in this particular set of this reporting period. But it's the same things again. It's the vehicles hit by things, getting killed by animals, being trapped by something, and then this one, whereas there was only 1 asphyxiation stroke drowning in the previous set of figures, here that's doubled to 2. So you can see it doesn't really change. So there has to be questions asked there. Why? You know, the focus from people like myself is always on the real risk. You know, when we go in and we look at danger, we look at the risks associated with a given sector. We want to look at the big stuff, what's killing, injuring people, what's the big numbers, and where do we need to target our time, effort and resources. And everybody's doing that, but the numbers remain the same. And there are factors that would explain that, and I'm going to come on to those later, why agriculture and farming and landed estates is a difficult sector for health and safety. And there are a number of factors that come into play, and we'll go into those in a little bit later. So I guess what I'm sort of presenting to you over the last 3 slides is it's a sector that's a big sector. Let me put some context onto that actually. Here you can see the numbers that the actual workforce doesn't really fluctuate that much. You know, I've gone back to 2018. So today, or the latest figures, back end of 2022, we're looking at about 400,000 people in the sector, but it's still given as one of the highest number of fatalities of all industries, including, you know, your construction industry that I mentioned before. One of the things I'd like to mention here, on the right hand side of your screen there, you can see a few bullet points, and this may account for some of the reasons why it's such a dangerous sector. All of these different factors coming into play, and age has a bit to play in this as well. So 60% of the farming workforce currently is over the age of 55, and only 13% of the farming workforce are under 35. So it's an older population, and that is a predisposition, if you like, to stress, tiredness, less ability to do what is a really hard labor-intensive job with long hours in stressful conditions. So that's definitely a factor that will play a part in the accident statistics. The fact that most of the farming population are over the age of 55. It's very much an aging population. And so, going back to my days with Lysits, where we dealt with many farms throughout the United Kingdom, what we typically saw was, on a farm, not a massive number of employees, but predominantly family businesses. They're normally a family business. As you can see by the graphic, the larger proportion of workers are farmers, partners, directors and spouses. They tend to be fairly close-knit units, populated by friends, family and that kind of stuff, which also has an impact when things go wrong as to the viability of businesses going forward. When mums and dads and brothers and sisters become injured or killed at work, it has a massive impact on the viability, operational viability of the farming business itself. So let's just have a quick look on the right hand side there. Then we've got our age sort of brackets, if you like, that most of the current farming population are the older population. That I think will change over time. There's obviously the younger cohort coming through agricultural college now, and interestingly enough, when it comes to health and safety, the younger cohort, so those coming through now, they're more exposed to health and safety. So if you take the 55 to 70-year-old farmer, they've come through man and boy, or lady and girl as it were, or girl and lady, and safety and health and safety promotion, occupational health, mental health wasn't really on the agenda that much in those formative years. So if you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, and indeed up to probably the late 70s, health and safety really wasn't a thing in the agricultural sector. Everyone knew it was dangerous, it was dirty, it was long hours, but that's just the way it was. That's what you get if you work in farming. Well, that thought process is changing that. So the younger people coming through now, so those now coming through agricultural college, coming through with learning all about business and agriculture, they're exposed to the internet, they're exposed to technology, they're exposed to apps and different ways of doing things on the farm, and that includes health and safety. So a lot of farm safety now for the under 55s, not all, but the vast majority, will be taking advantage of technology and apps and the stuff that's now widely available and easily available and very cheaply available as well, taking away a lot of the donkey work and a lot of the mystique of agricultural health and safety. Because if you go back to those 3 slides that we looked at, where we mentioned the actual facts and figures, it's not rocket science. It's actually very straightforward. Every year the same things kill people. It's cattle, it's machinery, things collapsing and people drowning or getting asphyxiated. So, you know, the actual factors aren't that hard to control, but yet we still see them year in, year out. So finally, on the right hand side, before I move on from this particular slide, other factors relating to safety and stress in this environment. So in our agricultural environment, it's a lonely job. You know, they're out there from early morning in the cold, the wet, the damp, or sometimes in the heat and the stress and sweating away, whatever it might be. They're exposed to all those horrible conditions. Stressful conditions for long hours has to and does have an impact on health and safety. Other stresses involved, it's very much a weather dependent sector, and that can have an impact on safety and indeed mental health. So if we need rain and we don't get any rain, then there's a major problem with the viability of our crops. And the viability of our crops is what keeps us alive and pays our bills. And it can work the other way. If we get too much rain and we get crops that are destroyed and we can't harvest and we can't get the grain or the wheat in because of the conditions, we can actually lose entire crops. So sometimes a whole year's worth of profit and business can be wiped out purely because of the weather, and that will have a direct impact upon stress and by default health and safety. A couple of final points on the bottom right hand side of this particular slide here. It's got to be stressful, all of those long hours, and you're living at work, and it's famous for people not sleeping very well. Stressed farmers, up early, bed late. You often see them, I see them all the time, you know, out in the fields when the conditions are right. They can still be out there at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night getting that last minute bit of work done just in case tomorrow the weather changes and we can't get it done. One of the other key things to mention is mental health. I will mention this later on. There's a whole range of farming charities now. The Addington Fund and the Farming Community Network are two that spring immediately to mind, dedicated to farmers' welfare. Health and safety still being important, but dedicated to the welfare of farmers and allied trades and their mental health and well-being, because it's a subject, again, over the years, farmers have been stressed and farmers have been worried and farmers have been committing suicide for many, many, many years. But it wasn't really on the agenda. It wasn't talked about. It was a tough profession. People just got on with it and did it without seeking the help that perhaps they should have. I'm very pleased to say I'm actually involved with a number of farming charities, particularly related to the armed forces, like the Forces Farming and High Ground are two that I'm personally involved with. And there's a big drive now and a lot of information and resource and help and assistance available for stressed farmers, because it is recognised as a major, major issue. So what motivates our farmers and our agricultural workers to get on with health and safety then? There's a number of key things. The ones at the bottom, you safety professionals will be very much aware of, so I'll only skip over those in a moment. I've put on the top of the slide there things that may or may not motivate people to comply or attempt to comply with health and safety. Bear in mind the older demographic, so the 55 to 85-year-old farmers. Health and safety is probably more of just a pain in the butt, to be honest, than something that's a good idea for their business, something that's good for their people, good for their profitability, their bottom line, their brand, their reputation, the whole thing that we all know health and safety helps to promote to the older demographic. And I know this to be a fact because I speak to these people on a regular basis, and often my initial barrier is to try and discuss why health and safety is such a good idea, not just for the people, which it is obviously, but also for the business side of things as well, and the ongoing viability of the farming or estate operation. If you go to a farmer typically and sell health and safety as it's because the law says so, you've lost it right from the get-go. It's a hard sell in most sectors. It's an impossible sell in this sector, because if you take your typical farm, particularly the guys and girls who have been in it for some time, unless they've experienced the downside, so unless someone's been injured or killed, God forbid, or made ill as a result of working on their particular farm, then trying to sell them health and safety is a real loser, because they've done all right so far for the last 40 years without perhaps health and safety. So me and you going in and saying, hey, look, you need to do this, this, and this. The question might well be, well, why? I've been good so far. So the HSC and health and safety legislation, whilst it is a factor, for most agricultural businesses, particularly the smaller family-run enterprises, it's not a big driving factor. Now, the next one on the list has more clout, believe it or not, than the health and safety executive. So you're all well aware it's illegal to operate a business in the United Kingdom without employer's liability insurance. So farm insurance is essential from an employer's liability perspective, but also all of the other insurances that come into play, such as your public liability, and you've got various other policies that farmers can take advantage of that protect them against poor crop yield. They can protect against people dumping on their land. So you'll be aware agricultural crime is a massive problem throughout the United Kingdom. It's stated to cost in excess of £45 million every year. The NFU, the National Farmers Union, the big insurer, every year they put together their rural crime statistics, and the latest one after COVID stated about £45 million worth of crime. That's nicking quad bikes, and stealing fuel is the big one at the moment, whether that be red tractor diesel or normal diesel. But also one of the other big contenders is people dumping on your land, so illegal fly tipping, because once it's on the farmer's land, they're responsible for the cleanup bill themselves, but they can insure against it. Now, the other good thing about insurance is, and why it's good for health and safety, is normally hand in hand with your insurance policy, at some point, the underwriter, so the person providing the cover, so the big underwriter, Zurich, Norwich Union, and others, will often send in one of their liability assessors. So farmers could well expect to find, in fact, they're more likely to see an insurance underwriter, liability inspector coming to see them than the health and safety executive. Normally, they're going to see the HSE if something's gone wrong. Another reason why it's not such a main driver to promote safety in a business, but they are more likely to see the underwriter coming in, and excuse me. And so the insurance underwriter, so from the main insurance company, will often go in and do a review of the operation, so a review of the business and the practices, and with a specific aim of looking at health and safety compliance. How is this business complying with health and safety legislation? And what that normally results in is either a tick in the box. I'm just going to take a quick drink. Normally a tick in the box, well done, you're there or thereabouts, or more commonly, one of two outcomes, either requirements, insurance requirements, or insurance recommendations. So they'll look at the operation and then decide what needs to be done to enable closer demonstration to compliance status. And where they give you a requirement, they'll give you a timeline. It's a bit like an improvement notice from the HSE, effectively. It doesn't have the same legal ramifications. However, where the requirement is documented, they'll probably give you 1, 2, or 3 months to rectify it, depending on what it is. So, for example, it might be that the farm hasn't had the EIS, the electrical installation condition report, completed in the last 5 years. That will automatically become a requirement. They'll give you a couple of months to get it sorted out, and your insurance, your cover, will be dependent upon you completing and documenting and proving that you've done that. And then they might give you some recommendations, which are just the nice to do. You know, yeah, there'll be your lower risk stuff, might involve a bit of signage or a new gate or something to do with security, whatever it might be. And they're the nice to, you get round to those when you can, and typically you'll get plenty of time to get those done. So we've got the HSC, we've got our insurance. Another big driver, and this is a good driver for a health and safety person to have at his or her disposal, is if you go back to the previous slides, and we talked about the demographic of the farm worker. about 170 odd thousand of the 300,000 to 400,000 workers are partners, family and spouse. So here it becomes very, very personal to the farmer. So when we start talking safety and keeping people safe, we can talk about their sons, daughters, wives, brothers, sisters, friends, etc. And it makes it a very, very personal thing. And you know, there's been some horrific stories. Just bear with me 1 second. There's been some horrific stories where, and there's one fairly recently where an uncle, for a bit of a laugh, was taking his brother's son was allowed to drive on the tractor, and he was just on the gate, on the step on the side. And unfortunately, as he went through a gate and he turned to the left, the poor little kid, who I think was about 7 years old, came off and was killed. And that's close, that's family, you know, and that's a real driver, and ought to be brought into the equation when we're talking safety and why people need to comply. Yes, we've got insurance, yes, we've got HSE, but it's more closer to home than that. On the right hand side there, got legislation. Good luck with that one. That's what I'd say. If we go into the vast majority of farms and we start talking that the reason you must do health and safety is because the law says so, yeah, I can tell you for a fact it's not a good starting point, and you're normally shown the door pretty quickly. There's other more compelling reasons for health and safety. So I'm going to brush over these very quickly. I appreciate who I'm speaking to, and the fact that you know this already. So the typical moral, legal and financial arguments for health and safety, we all know the moral one. You know, we ought to care. We need to care that our people come to work, they do a decent day's work, and they go home safe. They go home in the same condition, perhaps a little bit more tired than when they arrived, but they go home safe and without risk to their health, their safety, or their mental well-being. Financial impacts of safety can be huge. And in farming and agriculture, on not all of them, but the vast majority of them, margins are tight, profits are very, very tight, and a safety incident. We'll take the guy who it will come up later, but recently there was a guy who was sent to prison as he wrecked the riverbank, and the Environment Protection Agency got him. It wasn't a health and safety related one, but we'll come on to others that are later. His business is now gone because the individual was put in prison for 12 months and the organization was fined. There's no big margins in agriculture, or not all, but most agricultural businesses don't have 40, 50, 60,000, 70,000 pounds knocking around to pay a fine after a prosecution for committing a health and safety offence. It will normally put the business into liquidation. This is a very good driver for health and safety, where we can do a balancing act, and we can justify, yes, it might cost X pounds to invest in safety, invest in your people, invest in systems and processes. However, on the other side of the coin, if you don't, the outcome is catastrophic. The outcome is bankruptcy, prison, brand damage, whatever the particular driver may be for that business. You know, there's a better argument than just let's do it because the law says so. So there's a few reasons on the board there why financially it makes sense to promote and demonstrate good proactive risk management and health and safety. And you know, expertise, brand damage, insurance costs, they're all real dangers to the ongoing viability of the farming or the agricultural business. If we get it wrong and we're fined or prosecuted, or even if we're not, even if we end up with people off sick, staff replacement costs, downtime, we might have damaged plant, damaged machinery, damaged buildings. All of these things add up to cost the business quite dearly, and sometimes catastrophically. And then the one that I tend not to talk to my businesses and my customers about too much. Everyone knows it's the law, and everyone cares about the law, but using it as an argument as to this is why you need to promote safety, in my opinion, is not normally a very strong argument to put across to Billy the farmer, who might be 65 years old, has been farming since he was 15, and he's still got all his fingers and all his toes, and he can still hear and see, never had an accident in his life. You can't tell him anything about safety, and he's probably right. He's probably been doing it right all that time. So coming at it from the law says so, we need a different narrative for most farmers and agricultural workers out there today. We need a bit of a better argument. It's always in the press, though. If you do have an interest in agricultural safety, or you want to know what's going on, keep an eye on our website. So we have various feeds into us from external sources, including the Health and Safety Executive Prosecution Database, but that's normally quite some time after an incident has occurred. So as soon as we get something that's newsworthy, we will turn it into two things. It goes onto a LinkedIn safety snippet. So if you're interested, find me on LinkedIn, please connect, and then keep your eye out for our safety snippet. The second something happens, it becomes a safety snippet, and we put it out there as this is what's happened. And today there's been notification. I've not turned it into a snippet yet, because I've only just heard about it a couple of hours ago, but the HSC have notified a death to do with the overhead power line this morning in Cambridgeshire. Now, I don't know the details of that yet, but I will certainly find those out later on. That will become a safety snippet. It will go out on LinkedIn. It will find its way onto the news section of our website. But we don't just talk about this has happened. It's this has happened, and this is the reason why, and this is what you need to do about it. And we'll invariably add a download sheet or direct people to the Health and Safety Executive relevant publications. So our news feeds are useful to people, and we always ensure we give some free information. But it's just a few examples on the screen in front of you there. This is not uncommon, of course. So I can guarantee, 100% guarantee, that if you log on the 1st of every month and you go to the HSE website and you go to the news section, I'm sure you're all aware of it, you'll see the prosecutions, you'll see what's happened. I'll guarantee you'll see something to do with farming, agriculture, forestry. It's because it's so dangerous. You know, it's a big, dangerous environment to be working in, and there's always something going on. And typically, as we mentioned earlier on, typically it will relate to those key factors. It will be people getting killed by cattle. Very often people walking across open fields, getting trampled or gored or crushed by cattle, particularly cows with calves, highly dangerous. They're easily spooked, not only by people, but people out walking their dogs, careless dog walkers. It'll involve cattle, it'll involve people getting electrocuted, it'll involve people getting crushed by something or becoming engaged and entangled in some high torque powered machinery, like the power takeoff on a tractor, which again is unfortunately quite a common incident, and I'll show you a few examples of that later on, but not too gory. I've removed the gore. I'm mindful I don't want to be upsetting everybody. So it's always newsworthy. It's always in the news. The other reason that safety in agriculture and landed estates and farming and associated injuries has become so important from our perspective, so from the health and safety professional perspective, is because farms have to diversify. COVID was a classic example of this. Farming obviously continued, they were producing the food, but as we came out of lockdown, as the country started to open up again, there was a massive opportunity. So if you were an owner of a farm or an estate, you've got land, you've got open space, all of a sudden you became the go-to place. People wanted to come and visit your attractions. I'm allowed to mention this. I work with the Thorpe Perrow estate in Bedale on the outskirts, in North Yorkshire, on the outskirts of Bedale. And as lockdown started to, so as we started to come out of lockdown, the numbers of people visiting the estate, because it was a big open arboretum with fields and places to walk, the numbers just went absolutely crazy and rocketing. And it's the same across the sector, where margins are tight, where the farming business is easily affected by weather, government policy, Brexit, and all these other factors that come into play. If you've got that expanse of land, all of a sudden you've got an opportunity. On the top right there, we've got camping and glamping, outdoors, but it brings with it additional risks, and your farmers are normally concentrated on farming and the risks associated with that. Now, they're big in your face risks. Power takeoff, getting wrapped around a power takeoff, that's pretty much in your face, and you're on alert to danger, and you're going to be looking after yourself immediately. Working around cattle, working around big combine harvesters, spraying, working near overhead power cables. These things scream at you, danger, and I'm going to hurt you if it goes wrong. But then when they start to diversify, it changes the risk landscape. Suddenly we've got glamping and camping, and we've got carbon monoxide risk. We've got the use of log burners and the risks and the legal requirements around heaters and installation and annual checks, and all of these food safety risks. It suddenly changes the landscape. On the top right hand side there, that whilst it might look nice and quirky and a lovely little Airbnb go-to venue, the farmer forgot all about planning, and consequently was prosecuted and fell foul. And as you walk around this slide here, let's go around from the top right and work our way around. We introduce other risks when we diversify. We suddenly find loads of petting zoos and petting farms opening up, and that brings with it the risks with kids, highly vulnerable population, and we're suddenly getting them interacting with animals that can bite and kick and scratch and spread diseases and all sorts of stuff. A lot of farms diversified into sporting, into shooting, whether that be clays or birds or venison. Big risk, big danger. Pick your own, big risk, big danger. What you normally find around pick your own venues is to bring in the numbers and to make it attractive to the kids as well, they suddenly pop up little funfair rides or bouncy castles, or jump on the back of the tractor and I'll take you around the strawberry fields, and all the kids are on the back, as you can see on there. And again, it brings all these different sort of diversification risk factors that people often don't think about. Clarkson's a classic example. At Diddley Squat, all of a sudden there's farms, shops, and the risks come with it. Planning risks. Suddenly you got 500 or 600 people wanting to park a car, and you've got brand risk, you've got brand damage risk, because all the locals are upset. They can't get around the roads, they can't park, and there's rubbish everywhere, and all these diversification risks that we need to have on our risk map, if you like, when we're dealing with this sector. So we look at the farm side, but what else are they doing? And often people are moving into wedding venues and hen parties, and you name it. It's very, very diverse. The good news is, though, this massive risk landscape of agriculture, landed estate and farming, for the health and safety people, it's actually not that complex. It's actually pretty straightforward. So let's now put ourselves into compliance mode. Let's imagine we're going into farms, we're going into these diverse environments where there might be camping and pick your own and petting shops and Airbnbs and booking.coms and shoots. What are we going to talk about? What ought we put on the agenda of the owner, the manager, so that we can help them, assist them, and work closely with their teams for them to not only be compliant and safe, but to be able to demonstrate that when the time comes, for various reasons. It might be the HSE, it might be the insurance, it might be after an accident, who knows, where we might need to be able to prove what we're doing. And that's one of the key things of farm health and safety, keeping it simple yet demonstrable. We need to be able to demonstrate what we're doing. So let's have a quick look at that demonstrability. What are we going to need to be able to show? So just checking the time here. Yep, we're moving on. let me just double check on my timing. I've got my watch out now, so I need to make sure I don't harp on too long. So compliance, it's very straightforward, isn't it, really? You know, it's very clearly laid out what we need to do, and it depends whether they employ more than 5 people, etc. You know, the normal safety rules apply. So what I want to point out initially is this document here. So right in front of you in the middle there at the bottom, what a good farm looks like. So what the health and safety executive did a few years ago is said, look, here's a document that if you can demonstrate that you're compliant or thereabouts with this document, you're not likely to get any hassles when we come and visit your premises. And all of our activity from a health and safety perspective is geared towards being able to demonstrate compliance with that document there. But then there's the more complex stuff as well when it comes to occupational hygiene and disease and pollution and other bigger risks. But that's the basics. So if a farm complies with that, they're okay. The slide in front of you shows what we ought to be considering: health and safety policy, insurance, risk assessments. Occupational health is a thing that's so overlooked in this sector, vastly overlooked. Farmers are exposed to noise, vibration, dust, zoonosis, you name it. They're exposed to so many things that could affect their occupational health and well-being, yet very, very few are onto it with regular checks and occupational health checks. Something we try and rectify as we go around and we do our advice. So yeah, your normal set of compliance policies, procedures, risk assessments, etc. And access to competent health and safety advice. There's a great website. The HSC has really got a brilliant set of tools, if you like, for the agricultural sector. But it's a bit of you know, for the farmer, for the farm worker, the farm owner, it's a bit of a nightmare. It's a complex arena to work in, and often the concentration will be in the wrong area. People will concentrate in areas that they're comfortable with, rather than getting out of their comfort zone and dealing with the stuff that really matters, the stuff that's dangerous and is going to kill people, and might be a little bit more complex when it comes to doing risk assessments and developing training programs and toolbox talks around those particular risks. So that's why a competent safety advisor obviously is required to guide them and steer them through the minefield, and that's where the likes of you and me and others have a very important role to play. So this slide is just to demonstrate the complexity of the risk. So on the one hand, we're saying it's pretty straightforward. We know what's killing people, but from the safety professional perspective, we've got to start thinking right outside the box. So if you look at farming, agriculture, landed estates, the risks are massive and very, very sort of diverse. And I've just put a few on there. You know, the normal risks like your gas safety, electrical, your asbestos. To me and you, they're probably bread and butter. Go and talk to your average farmer about an asbestos management plan and various surveys, particularly when they're knocking down buildings. They're not going to be thinking asbestos. So one of the key parts of our role in health and safety and compliance is to make sure that at the get-go, we are identifying what's applicable to that specific farm or estate. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We've just established they're so diverse. So we need to make sure that what we provide is fit for purpose. So there we can see all of the key risk factors, from pesticides to poisons to asbestos. To the right-hand side there, where we've got massive grain stores and grain drying operations on a lot of agricultural farms, where people go and talk to a farmer about grain and things exploding and killing loads of people and destroying half of the farm buildings, and they'll look at you as if you're from Mars. They don't compute grain and grain dust with fires and explosions. So that's where our expertise really becomes vital. We can introduce other areas of safety that are that little bit more complex that I mentioned earlier, where we can start talking about disease and explosion and all of these other things, which brings home the need for competent health and safety advice. Just moving on swiftly through them. So these are the key killers. We've mentioned the overhead power cables. Again, there's one that's occurred today in Cambridgeshire. I don't have any details yet, but it's not uncommon. It's normally down to a lack of planning. It's normally contractors or other people coming in who haven't had hazard information shared with them. So typically in a farming operation, we're going to have people coming in to do our combining for us. A lot of farms subcontract these big jobs, and unless we're sharing the danger areas with them and taking them through induction and giving them training and good information, the risk is there. People often forget the risks of cattle. 9 times out of 10, they're docile, they're friendly, and all the rest of it. It takes a nanosecond for a cow or a bull to become spooked for whatever reason. It might be a flash of light, a reflection of something, or it might be a dog or a rodent, whatever it might be. The nature changes and someone's crushed against a post or a fence. So cattle safety is really important. And then on the right hand side, look at the diversification of vehicles that we've got. It's big, dangerous, heavy machinery, and when things go wrong, people get killed. It's that simple. So our role is to identify and put in place simple, effective controls and training to keep those people safe. Moving on very quickly, farm vehicles and people, and in particular children, where children are on farms, highly dangerous. And one of the things I want to stress here is training. It's so often overlooked, the importance of training. And again, given the complexity of the risk, there's a whole range of training to take account of. So one of our key roles as an advisor for safety in this field is to really analyze what's going on and do a very, very careful training needs analysis, where we can identify groups requiring certain amount of training, the level of training, and of course the frequency of refresher that goes with that. I mentioned this briefly. This is one of those, so just coming towards the end now, I'm mindful of time. Slurry, lagoon, slurry mixing, highly dangerous. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, mixture of a horrible, obnoxious gases. Not a big killer. Over the last few years, you saw there was two people died last year, one person the year before, none the year before that. But normally complacency, normally rushing to get stuff done, and very typical is where one person becomes overcome, there's normally 2 or 3 that follow as they go and try and help out. So we have to stress the dangers of slurry mixing and lagoons and how quickly people can be overcome and killed. And finally, the last couple of slides, we need to be mindful of zoonoses, so diseases of animals transmitted to humans, leptospirosis and avian flu and chicken pox and SARS and swine flu, the list goes on and on and on. And it's really the simple control of keeping your hands clean and good personal hygiene and keeping their enclosures clean normally takes care of all of that. And then the dangerous stuff that I've talked about here, there's a couple of examples. There's some great videos on YouTube relating to the dangers of agricultural safety. A lot of them produced by the Southern Irish Health and Safety executive equivalent. Some brilliant videos and interviews with people who've had it wrong, who got it wrong, and interacted with machines and have become killed, become injured and killed. Finally, mental health and stress, and then it's time for me to stop. My little beep has just pipped off there. This is a dangerous, stressful environment, and this is one area that's been overlooked over the years, but it's coming more and more to the fore now, and there's a lot of organizations cropping up offering advice and assistance and identifying the key issues with mental health and stress relating to this dangerous and arduous working environment. So I don't know what we do now. That's me come up to the time there. I don't know if someone's going to jump in, but from my perspective, thank you. I hope that's been of interest to you. I'm here at the end of a phone, or find me on LinkedIn if there are any questions or additional information that you require.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, we have a question.
Thank you.
And it seems like the common method in promoting HSSE in agriculture is via negative consequence. What do you think if we promote the positive consequence? For example, recognition and well-respect from the community, linked to better yield / output, and as role model for others to inspire.
I 100% agree with that sentiment. And going back to my talk, where I mentioned, don't go talking to farmers about legislation, don't go talking to farmers about this can happen, because 9 times out of 10 it hasn't happened to them, and they don't think it's going to happen to them, so they're not particularly bothered. So it has to be on those positives. It has to be, the financial benefits, the family benefits. We all benefit. We end up with a healthy, motivated workforce, less likely to get injured, less likely to become stressed, and more likely to be productive, promoting the brand of that particular business.
Perfect, thank you. Julie, have you got anything to round up with?
Just to thank Richard for your excellent presentation, and to let everyone know that the recording will be uploaded onto the YouTube channel probably tomorrow now. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening wherever you are in the world. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much.